Hey guys, so there was these two men, older guys, older gentlemen, retired, and they would sit in a bar every night, drink their whiskey, and reminisce about the glory days. They were both baseball players. They were studs in high school. Went to the minor leagues, never made it to the big leagues, but they missed the ability to go out and play ball. And every night, that's all they would talk about. They watch a game on the TV that was at the bar and just talk about all the times they had, great games playing. And one guy was a pitcher, and he always brought up his no-hitter that he pitched. The other guy was a third baseman. He would talk about some of the great double plays he made. And this is what they did. But one night, one of the guys says to the other guy, "Hey, man, I just got the news. I got cirrhosis of the liver. Doctor's giving me 2 weeks to live." And I've had a lot of family members and friends die of cirrhosis, and that's about how much notice you get. So, just a word of advice to you young guys that think it's cool drinking whiskey. Your liver's okay until it's not. They can tell you, "Oh, your blood tests are good, your blood tests are good." And then one day they'll say, "You got cirrhosis." And you're like, "I thought my blood tests were good." Oh, they were. They're not anymore. So I digress, so eventually the guy dies. 2 weeks on the mark, he dies. Then a couple weeks later, the one man who's still alive is sitting at the bar watching a game, drinking his whiskey, and his friend appears like a ghost. And he's like, "Whoa, what are you doing here?" He's like, "Dude, the Lord let me come for a brief moment to tell you something." He's like, "What do you got to tell me?" He goes, "Well, I got good news and bad news, bro." He's like, "What's the good news?" He goes, "The good news is there's baseball in heaven." He's like, "Awesome. What's the bad news?" "You're pitching tomorrow." So he had to tell him he's getting ready to pitch tomorrow. So it's a funny joke. And ironically, most people think it's bad news if you die. Even Christians think, "Oh man, I'm going to die," and they're sad. The early Christians didn't have this mentality because they were so close to death. They were so close to death. They had a whole different mentality. It actually, being a Christian in the first 4 centuries, meant you were probably going to get killed for being a Christian. And they would have mass, they would have holy mass in catacombs. And what the catacombs were underground cemeteries. So they would literally have church amongst bones. And, this is where we started saving the bones of saints. And we still have the bones of St. Peter at the Vatican. And there's been a lot of miracles. And, when I was a Protestant, I was like, that sounds weird. They keep these bones and they touch them and miracles happen. But it's biblical, When the man was thrown into the grave with Elisha, it says when he touched Elijah's bones, he came alive. And we have documented miracles about people touching the relics of saints throughout history. Even one of my deacons, not the one that just passed, unfortunately, I'm not talking about him, but I have another deacon who had an amazing testimony about heart recovery. He was supposed to be dead many years ago, and he was given a relic of St. Padre Pio. So the early Christians had no problems with death, In fact, they knew the veil between life and death amongst Christians was so thin. When they asked people to pray for them, they had no problems asking the saints in heaven to pray for them. And when I was a Protestant, I was like, well, that's not in the Bible. Well, number one, the word Bible isn't in the Bible. The word Trinity isn't in the Bible. But we know the Bible and the Trinity are true teachings. But it is in the Bible. It shows you, Jesus conversing with Elijah and Moses at the Transfiguration. In Revelation chapter 5 and Revelation chapter 8, it talks about the saints and the angels lifting up the prayers of the saints on earth to God with incense. That's why the ancient church still uses incense today. So the veil between life and death was very thin. This is why you can see on these catacombs today, and historians date them to like the first century, like 100 AD, 90 AD, some in the second century, that says, Peter, pray for me. Mother Mary, pray for me. So the early Christians had no problem with these doctrines, because they knew that they didn't become a Christian to be rich and and be healthy. They became a Christian knowing they were going to be killed for the gospel. And the most dangerous place to be during these first 4 centuries in the church was being the Pope. And again, my Protestant brothers will say, I don't see Pope in the Bible. Again, you don't see Bible in the Bible, but the Bible's true. Pope is just an affectionate word that means Papa. But having a central leader is very clear from Matthew 16, 18, and 19. Jesus said, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Very important. And what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And you can see through history, we've always had a pope. The first one was Peter, then Linus, then Cletus, then Clement, all the way up. I think we get 266 popes, if I'm not mistaken, an unbroken chain. And Pope Francis is our pope today. But out of the first 32 popes, 30 of them were martyred for the faith, for not denying the gospel of Jesus Christ. Ancient historian Eusebius tells us the story of how Peter was martyred. They said he brought him and his wife to be crucified, but they made him watch his wife get crucified first. And St. Peter yelled out to her, Penelope, remember the Lord. He was encouraging his wife. He wasn't weeping and crying. He was encouraging her. Remember the Lord. You're going to see him now. And although, the world wants to make traditional Christians, women look like they're weak because they stay home and take care of the children and cook and do all that, and the men go out to work as it should be, these women were strong. Penelope went willing. She would not, all she had to do was deny the Lord, and she did it. And there's many Christian women most Christians were women. The majority of Christians at this time were women, because it was a place that they can go and be equal with men. And we had different roles. Like I said, women took care of the children, men went out to work. And this is what the church teaches today. If you're able, some people are unable to do this, and there's grace, but the women were strong. Many Christian women went to their death, not denying the Lord. They were strong women because they had the Spirit of God, and the Spirit of God is not timid. It's a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. So after Penelope was crucified, they came and crucified Peter. And he said, I am not worthy to die like my Lord. So they crucified him upside down. And this is why we have an upside down cross in the Vatican, to remember the martyrdom of St. Peter. Not because the Catholic Church is demonic, like Jack Chick and Dave Hunt used to say back in the day when I was a young evangelical. And then the second Pope, Linus, was beheaded in 70. History tells us the second Pope, Linus, was beheaded in 76 AD. And beheading was a brutal way to murder popes. In 250 AD, Valerian put out an edict to kill the Pope, all his bishops, priests, and deacons. And he got a hold of Pope Sixtus II and beheaded him. But before he was beheaded, Pope Sixtus II, he didn't go run and hide. He waited. But he told his Deacon Lawrence, who was in charge of the church's treasury, give all the churches money, anything you have, the gold chalice where we drink the Lord's blood, whatever you have, give it to the poor. So he went out and dispersed all the church's treasures to the poor. And then when Valerian sent his general to kill Pope Sixtus, he beheaded Pope Sixtus and all his deacons except Deacon Lawrence, because they knew Deacon Lawrence was the treasurer. And they said, Deacon, go and get us all the treasures of the church and bring us back to us, and we'll give you a painless death. But if you don't, we'll catch you and you'll have the most painful, excruciating death. And he said, well, the riches of the church are many. I'll need 2 days to gather this. So the general said, yeah, okay, go ahead, 2 days, but you better come back. So Deacon Lawrence walks in the door and the general's like, where are the riches of the church? Where are the treasures of the church? So he opens up a huge door and in walks hundreds of poor, homeless, lame, blind, the dregs of society, the poorest members of society. And Deacon Lawrence said, here is the treasure of the church. Here is the riches of the church. And the church is much richer than Caesar. It infuriated the general, and he gave him the most painful death. He threw him on the rack and burnt him alive. This is the history of the Catholic Church. Then, medieval times, we've had some bad popes, and, my Protestant brothers and sisters always want to bring that up. Some were fornicating and, doing terrible sins like that. But in my 2-year study of the Catholic Church, which made me come back to the Catholic Church, the claim that I was trying to disprove was that no pope ever taught heresy. That Jesus promised that the gates of hell will not prevail meant that no pope could teach heresy. That there was an unbroken chain of doctrine and dogma, and it was never changed. And I found this to be true, even with the bad popes. And my Protestant brothers and sisters will say, well, you don't let your priest get married, and Peter was married. That is not a doctrine, that is not a dogma. That is a discipline, a spiritual discipline. That part of the Catholic Church, the Latin Rite, asks our priests to take a vow of celibacy. But the Eastern Rite Catholics are allowed to get married. Anglican priests that convert and become Catholic priests are allowed to stay married. So it's just a discipline that could change tomorrow. It's not a doctrine or a dogma. And when I was a Protestant, I would say, well, Pope Honorius was condemned. Dave Hunt and Jack Chick would bring all these lies up. Pope Honorius was condemned for teaching heresy. And as I looked into it, that was a lie. Pope Honorius was condemned for not punishing heretics. He was too lenient. He didn't teach heresy. He never taught a heresy. And then, these Protestants would say, well, your saint, Robert Bellarmine, said if a pope teaches heresy, he's no longer the pope. So obviously, a pope could teach heresy. And I said, well, read the rest of the context. In fact, in his book, Antichrist, St. Robert Bellarmine, actually read what he says. Don't listen to what protesting Christians are saying about him. His whole quote was, if the pope taught heresy, he would no longer be a pope. But that's hypothetical because it's impossible for a pope to teach heresy because Jesus promised Peter, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. And St. Robert Bellarmine went on to say, these are Protestant teachings. The Protestant teaching that the Pope could be an antichrist is a total Protestant invention. And again, recommend you read Antichrist by St. Robert Bellarmine to see what he actually said, not what people say he said. But ironically, excommunicated Catholic Martin Luther called Pope Leo X an antichrist. Excommunicated Catholic Marcel Lefebvre called Pope St. Pius, Pope St. John Paul II an antichrist. And recently excommunicated Catholic Carlo Vigano called Pope Francis an antichrist. So St. Robert Bellarmine is right. These protesting Christians will always call the Pope an antichrist. Now, we move on to World War II. We have Pope Pius XII. Thank God anti-popers didn't have YouTube back then, because St. Pius XII was accused of being Hitler's Pope. I remember being a young evangelical reading a Jack Chick tract, and what that is just a little pamphlet, and it was called Hitler's Pope. And Dave Hunt had, I think he wrote a book, Hitler's Pope, and they claimed Pope Pius II was in bed with Hitler, like he made a deal with Hitler, you know? And that was because he wasn't criticizing Hitler, and Hitler wasn't attacking his churches. But you don't know what you don't know. That's why I tell people, don't criticize the Pope, because you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. When the war ended, the world found out that Pope Pius II did make a deal with Hitler. He said, I won't harshly criticize you if you leave my churches alone. You don't invade my churches. Let us have mass, leave us alone. And he did that so the church could hide the Jews. According to the state of Israel, who thanked Pope Pius II, who gave Pope Pius XII, the highest medal that you could give a civilian, they said the Catholic Church hid in the Vatican and all their churches combined 900,000 Jews. The state of Israel thanked Pope Pius XII for hiding the Jews. And many priests were killed trying to bring them to the churches, and they never gave up. All they had to do was say where they were hiding them, and they didn't have to die. And unlike the mafia that's ratting out each other these days, they never gave up the Pope. They never gave up their priests. They went to their death. This is a fact. This is history. These were stand-up men, these Catholic priests. Also, Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem, Isaac Herzog, wrote a thank you letter to Pope Pius XII for saving all his Jewish brethren. And the Chief Rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, not only sent him a thank you, but he converted to Catholicism. The Chief Rabbi in Rome became a Catholic because of what Pope Pius XII and the Catholic Church did for the Jews. Imagine if these so-called Catholic YouTubers that hate Pope Francis were alive then. I mean, they're making money bashing Pope Francis. Imagine how much money they would have made on YouTube bashing Pope Pius XII. Because, you know, for the whole time of the war, they would have been making YouTube videos saying, I can't believe he doesn't condemn Hitler. But a lot of them are anti-Semitic, so maybe they wouldn't. I didn't think of that at the time I was writing this. But they don't stop lying about the popes, you know. One of the greatest popes of our time, Pope St. John Paul II, I hear him lie on YouTube. And these are, you know, supposedly Catholics saying, Pope St. John Paul kissed the Quran. He wanted a one world government. He was a modernist. He was a feminist. The people that were with him were saying people were handing him books. People were handing him Greek Septuagints. He was with a group of people. They said, we never even mentioned that, but we don't know if it could have been a Greek Septuagint. Some of them looked like that. It could have been a Quran. He didn't know. But the culture that he was in, when you received a gift, in that culture, you kissed it as a way of saying thank you for the gift. Didn't mean he loved the Quran. He thought he didn't even know it. He had, you know, pictures are being taken. But anti-popes, anti-Catholic, people that hate the church and hate the Pope and want you and me to hate the popes, will always assume the worst. Or maybe they know the truth, but they want you and I to assume the worst. And these same people will call Pope Benedict, another great pope, a coward. A coward. He was fearful of the Masons, so he resigned. So this heretic Pope Francis could become pope. And they call Pope Francis because they lie about him too. You know, they said he was going to ordain women. And he came out and said it's impossible to ordain women. He actually changed canon law to make it a crime that you would be excommunicated if you ordained women. According to Pope Francis, he changed canon law, made it stricter, and said if a bishop ordains a woman, they're both excommunicated. Oh, he's going to allow gay marriage. And he came out and he said that church can't, forget about gay marriage. Marriage, you can't change. He said it early on. Marriage is between one man and one woman. God created marriage. No pope can change that. No church can change that. Oh, he's gonna allow same-sex unions. He comes out and says the church cannot bless same-sex unions because God cannot bless sin. And they just go on and on every day, something new. And I can be here all day telling you everything you heard that was outrageous about Pope Francis and give it to you in context. You're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Everything. I've had the most anti-Pope Protestants come up to me and give me the worst quotes. And I said, yeah, that sounds terrible, but let me tell you the whole context of it. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I notice, it's funny because I notice these last three popes were very manly men. They were men. They were like men. They're men, you know? If you look at their life, these guys were like rough guys. They weren't feminine. Or as today you hear a lot of YouTubers say this. I never hear regular people on the street say this. And this is why Trump was so cool, because he talked like regular people in the media would talk like, I don't know who. But you hear people say, we need more masculinity in Christianity. We need more masculine Catholics. Who the heck ever says masculine? I mean, these were tough guys. These were rough guys. Pope Francis was a bouncer, you know. Look at their lives. These were tough guys. But these guys that are always talking about masculinity, they seem to be the guys that hate the popes the most. And one thing I noticed about these guys, and I looked up, a lot of their backgrounds, and, I might be missing a few, but none of them ever served in the military. Now, I'm not saying serving in the military makes you a tough guy, but serving in the military teaches you respect, teaches you honor, and it teaches you loyalty. These men are so disloyal to our Pope. They show no honor, and they disrespect authority. They have no understanding of authority. And I'm not saying everybody that respects the Pope is an ex-military veteran, but I noticed, Catholic for Rednecks, who's been accused of being a Pope splainer and who got deplatformed by YouTube. I guess you catch him on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. But Catholic for Rednecks, ex-Marine. Tim Staples, ex-Marine. Myself, Navy veteran. Because we learned respect for authority. These guys that hate the Pope, they think they're entitled, somehow because they all went to college, they got out of high school, went to college. Most of them got degrees in philosophy and art, and they think they're really smart and they know better than the Pope. But that's feminine to me. Showing no respect, showing no honor, showing no loyalty. That's not masculine, that's feminine. I mean, look at Jesus. Look at the apostles. I mean, look at the saints. Saint Padre Pio, when he was wrongly canceled, and the people raged and protesting, and if he set up a GoFundMe, he would have made more than Father Altman, who got $1 million in a month. But instead of throwing gasoline on the fire, he rebuked the people. He said, don't you disrespect the Pope. Go home right now. I don't want to hear this anymore. And he said, the will of my superiors is the will of God. That's understanding authority. That's respect and honor. So I'm just going to leave you with two names. Ave Cassidy and Bonavita. Ave Cassidy was a little girl whose mother said when she was in Rome and the Pope Mobile came by, she held up her daughter because she had a hole in her heart. It was an infant, had a hole in her heart, and she wanted the Pope to pray for her. And one of his security guys grabbed her and gave it to the Pope. And she told him, my baby has a hole in her heart. And the Pope put his hand on her heart and prayed for her. The next week, the mother went, and the doctor was amazed that that hole was closed. That hole was closed. And the other name, Bonavita, was that little boy. If you remember, he walked up on the stage where Pope Francis was and took his hat and sat near to him. His mother said the boy was so severely disabled, He couldn't walk alone. He never walked up steps. She said it was a miracle to see him walk up those steps and sit by the Pope. And afterwards, the Pope came and talked to me. And I said, she said, I'm really worried. He's got all these problems. And the doctors are sure, they're 100% sure that it's a brain tumor. And they said she said the doctors say it's not possible that he doesn't have a brain tumor. And he said, for you, all things are possible. And he laid hands on the boy's head. The boy went to the doctor next week. There was no trace of a brain tumor. And the mother said he started getting better. And when you tell people start getting better, they're like, well, why isn't he better right away? I'm going to do a video about healing and miracles. Two different things. Healing is a process. Healing. So you get a little better, a little better, a little better. As you're walking with the Lord, for whatever reason, the Lord is taking time. Maybe there's spiritual healing that has to take place along with the physical healing. But miracles happen instantaneously. And there's many, many healings and miracles that Pope Francis has been involved in. Speaking of tumors, there was a little boy who had a tumor the size of a baseball, and it shrunk to undetectable after Pope Francis laid hands on him. And my Protestant friends were like, oh, you make the Pope out to be like, he's more than a man. No, he's just a man. In fact, Pope Francis and Pope St. John Paul said they both go to confession once a week. They both, Pope St. John Paul said he went to confession once a week. Pope, they know they're sinful men. We're all sinful men. But if you read Acts chapter 5, verse 15, it said the people lined up when Pope Peter walked by, just so maybe his shadow would touch them and they would be healed. So this is biblical too. So, if you believed all these lies about the Pope, I'm not saying you're feminine. I'm not even saying you're a bad person. Just like half of America believe the media about Trump, because most of you guys are like me. We get up, we go to work every day, we're busy, we have families to take care of. We don't have time to research all this. I do it, this is my hobby. Instead of watching TV, I do research. This is what I like to do. I like to make videos. It's not work, trust me, I love it. I wish I could do it all day long like some of these guys. But I know most people, I have friends, I know. You come home from a hard day's work, you want to do your research. So you flick on someone you like, someone you trust, and they tell you something, you trust them. And this is what happened with the media. But social media exposed them for their lies. So I'm just saying, if you don't have the time to research it, and they're telling you something terrible that our Pope said or did, just trust God. When Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail, 2,000 years, not one Pope has taught heresy. Cults have come and gone. Heretics have come and gone. Those who call the Pope an Antichrist have come and died. Vegan will die soon. We're all going to die soon. I'm 59. The average age in America, I think, is 76. So what's that give me? Less than 20 years if I'm average. If I really take care of myself, and, work out every day and eat clean, maybe I'll live to 90. But what's that? Compared to eternity. Think about this. The early Christians knew this. And they knew they were going to die in their 20s and 30s. Because they were going to get killed. But they still preached the gospel. And they still lived for Jesus. Because what the Lord has prepared for those who love him is not worthy to compare to what's on this earth. And Christians have gotten so far. It's obvious, Benny Hinn's and Jesse Duplantis talking about private jets and limousines. We could all see that's such fake Christianity. That's not real. But even us Catholics, sometimes we get so caught. We're like, it reminds me of a Keith Green song. I forget the song, but he's like, he said something it's like God talking to Keith. He's saying, bless me, Lord. And he's like, I can't feed your flesh. I can't feed your flesh. I forget I wish I would have prepared. It's a good quote on one of his songs. But basically, we're praying for houses. We're praying for bills. We're praying for cars, when we should be praying that we conform and become Christ-like, that we could die tomorrow in peace, that we can convert our neighbors where they can face death, because death comes to all of us. And this is our faith. This is why we have monasteries. I get a kick. I'm like, this is so Catholic. It's a Catholic thing. You see pictures of these monks amongst like skeletons, heads. We're not afraid of death. We're not afraid of death. Those in heaven, this is why we can ask those in heaven to pray for us, the same as we can ask those on earth to pray for us, because those in heaven are more alive than us. So God bless and stay Catholic.